Do not. Almost. Great. In that case, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Committee of the Whole for, goodness, July 26th. I'll call the meeting to order. Note that Councillor Toth has sent his regrets. He's on the road and unable to zoom in. And I'm hoping that we'll have Councillor Inkster join us shortly. Council, any issues, amendments, corrections to the agenda? Not motion to adopt as presented and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Without further ado, we'll turn right over to, I believe Mr. Jackson is on Zoom and will appear magically in a minute. Welcome, sir.
Hello. Oh,
Yep,
oh,
perfect.
you guys are sharing the slides. Sorry. Am I able to see the presentation, or should I just have it open on my own screen, or?
I think we're sharing it, so you maybe.
And then I can just, oh, okay. That's the second one. Could I see the other presentation?
Great.
So this is the one Elise will be doing, but there should be another. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well done.
Perfect. All right. My name is Brian Jackson. I run the Provincial Groundwater Observation Well Network for the Ministry of Environment. So I'm just here to give you a bit of an overview of the program that we run, its objectives, what we do, and kind of how we do it. Could you go to the next slide for me? Thank you. So just broadly speaking, the two objectives of the network are to understand the hydrogeology of key aquifers of importance to local communities, and then to use the data we collect on those aquifers to promote the sustainable use of groundwater for its users. And there's a bunch more details to that, but those are the primary objectives here: is understand the hydrogeology and sustainable use of this invisible resource. Next slide, please. So the program is managed between Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Forests. So the Ministry of Forests are our boots on the ground. Ministry of Environment basically sets the policies, the standard operating procedures, and the equipment we use and all that. The network is run entirely internally. So our staff are the ones who plan the expansion of the network, drilling new wells. They work with local governments. Our staff operate the stations and manage all the data that we produce. We don't outsource our work other than for specialized services. Like, we don't drill the wells ourselves. We have to hire a qualified well driller to do that sort of work. But otherwise, we're not contracting out the labor. The network is managed internally to ensure that it's operated consistently across the province. Next slide, please. So the network's actually been running since the 1960s, back when they thought we were going to start regulating groundwater use, which of course didn't happen until the Water Sustainability Act was passed back in 2016. So since 2016, the province has put more resources into expanding the network so that we have data to properly manage these aquifers. Right now we have over 240 active stations across the province, monitoring over 200 aquifers. At every station, the groundwater levels are recorded every hour on the hour 24/7. That's our primary objective here, is to monitor for water quantity, so groundwater levels. We do take samples to understand chemistry, but the program isn't structured in a way that you could characterize the chemistry of an entire aquifer just from, because most of these aquifers only have maybe one or two wells in them, which wouldn't be sufficient. So we focus on groundwater levels as opposed to chemistry. Next slide, please. So there's several motivating factors behind why regions across the province will expand the network locally. The most common reason is to support groundwater management decisions. So if there's an area with lots of licenses coming in, there's reports of wells going dry, there's conflict, there's scarcity. That's a good reason for us to be monitoring. Also in areas where you have groundwater and surface water connected, such that if you're draining the groundwater, you're going to be draining your streams. If those streams have aquatic life, that aquatic life will have certain environmental flow needs, which is a area of interest to the province. As well, monitoring for the impacts of climate change, especially on island or coastal aquifers, and monitoring for saltwater intrusion, which does cross into groundwater quality. Yeah, those are the main drivers behind why we are expanding the network, but there's others as well. Next slide, please. So with regards to Sechelt, we have added a couple wells to Sechelt in 2021. We've added several others up and down the Sunshine Coast, around Gibsons and Powell River and other places. So the reason we wanted to expand into Sechelt, it's a complicated area. There's complicated hydrogeology, which Elise will talk about in a moment. These wells that you see in front of you, those photos, are monitoring aquifer number 566. There's complicated lithology, there's artesian conditions, you have over time rising sea levels, you have the potential for saltwater intrusion, and then this aquifer is also presumably hydraulically connected to Chapman Creek, which is a sensitive stream. So there's a lot going on here, and we want to understand better the state of the aquifer and the hydrogeology of this area. The chart in front of you is the data from these two wells. We were short a technician, so there are, if you were to go to our website, there are a bunch of data gaps that will get filled once our new technician that we recently hired visits these sites in the coming weeks. So those stations will get up to snuff, and be interesting to see what's been going on there since we drilled these in March 2021. And next slide, please. I'm just going to give you guys just a couple examples, some of the analysis we do. We don't do a lot of analysis. Mostly we just generate and store the data and ensure the quality of the data and leave it to other parties to analyze it however they see fit. But there are a few bigger things we do. Primarily is the long-term trend analysis in groundwater levels. So is the aquifer stable? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? If the aquifer is decreasing, hey, we might have a problem and we might need to take certain actions to remedy that. This example here, I think, probably comes from Langley, I'm guessing, where it's decreasing about 20 centimeters a year, so that's not great. Although most of the aquifers we monitor are pretty stable. Next slide, please. And more recently, we have been using our PGON wells, that's just the acronym for the program, to help inform our drought calls, where the province declares their level of drought in different regions, because commonly the groundwater will feed the surface water. So if all of the aquifers are doing poorly in an area, chances are it's going to be a pretty rough summer for the surface water bodies that overlay that area. And we're refining our methodology behind drought monitoring over the next year or two. Next slide. Okay, so that was just a really quick, broad overview of the program, because I want to make sure I leave enough time for Elise, who will be going over a more complicated topic than I am. So I'll leave it to you, Elise.
Hey, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Jackson. And I guess Ms. Sandel, we're bringing, there it is, coming up on the screen. So take it away.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. My name is Elise Sandel. I'm one of the regional hydrogeologists with the Ministry of Forests South Coast Resource Management teams, and I'm going to be giving a very brief overview of the aquifers that are mapped in the Sechelt area, as well as introducing a few topics of consideration when utilizing groundwater for water supply. So this slide here just provides a little bit of background information about groundwater flow in coastal and mountainous settings. So aquifers are recharged by precipitation that infiltrates into the ground surface. And in mountainous regions, aquifers are also recharged by precipitation that falls on the mountaintops as well as in the upland areas, by the water flowing down the mountain slope and through the rock mass of the mountain into the sediments and aquifer materials at the base of the mountain. We refer to that as mountain block recharge. Once groundwater is in an aquifer, it typically flows downslope, mirroring the topography of the land surface. And once it reaches the base of a slope or a valley bottom, it often discharges into a stream, river, or wetland. However, in a coastal environment, groundwater can discharge directly into the ocean. And along the coastline, in the subsurface, there is an interface of fresh water where it meets saline, salty seawater. And there is often a wedge of salt water that extends inland under the ground surface. You can kind of see an example of that on the top right. One additional note as well is that when aquifers are comprised of a bedrock material rather than a sand and gravel material, groundwater flow is often dominated through the fractures in the bedrock. And this leads to an lower overall storage of water and lower general productivity of bedrock aquifers. Not always, but commonly. However, you can have variable well yields in bedrock aquifers depending on the significance of those fractures that are intersected by an individual well screen. Next slide, please. So one characteristic of consideration when using groundwater for water supply is an aquifer's vulnerability to contamination from activities on the land surface or in the shallow subsurface. So where there are potential sources of contamination or industrial activities, it's important to understand the direction of groundwater flow and the source area that's contributing recharge to a particular well or aquifer in order to understand the potential for contamination. Some of the characteristics of an aquifer that make it more vulnerable to contamination are when the aquifer and the groundwater table are shallow and close to the ground surface. As well, contaminants can move faster through bedrock fractures, increasing the vulnerability of those aquifers. Aquifers have lower vulnerability to contamination when they're deeper and when there's a layer of fine-grained sediments such as clay, silt, or till overlying the aquifer and acting as a potential barrier to the contamination. Next slide, please. So as Brian mentioned, one consideration as well for aquifers that are in a coastal environment is the potential for seawater intrusion. So this occurs when often groundwater pumping or extraction draws saline water into the freshwater aquifer. And it's important to know that once seawater intrusion occurs, it may be permanent or it may take many years to recover. So it's something we really want to prevent at the outset with the development of groundwater supplies. If you are constructing or operating a well in a coastal environment, it's recommended to work with a qualified professional to prevent seawater intrusion. But some very general tips that I can provide are to avoid drilling close to the coastline and excessively deep, and to not draw the groundwater below sea level. We do have a brochure called Best Practices for Prevention of Seawater Intrusion, and I recommend referencing that for further information about this topic. Next slide, please. And I also want to quickly highlight that some predictive analysis was done by Western Water Associates in order to predict the vulnerability to seawater intrusion along the West Coast. And those predictive maps are publicly available through our IMAP BC mapping interface by adding the layer titled Aquifer Vulnerability to Seawater Intrusion. And I've included some screen clips here of the predicted vulnerability in the seashell area in both the bedrock aquifers and the sand and gravel aquifers that I'm going to introduce shortly. And you can see on the top right, there are a few areas of orange, which are predicted to be a level 4 out of 5 for vulnerability to seawater intrusion. So there is perhaps a potential for that to occur in this area. Next slide. And the last concept I want to introduce is the connection between groundwater and surface water systems. So in many landscapes, aquifers and streams are connected, and very often aquifers are discharging water into streams that help maintain the base flows in those streams. When groundwater is pumped out of a groundwater well, it has the potential to deplete flow from a stream. So as shown in some of the figures on the right-hand side of this slide. And under the BC Water Sustainability Act, the volume and timing of water required for the proper functioning of an aquatic ecosystem in a stream is protected, and it must be considered in water management decisions. So in settings where groundwater and surface water are connected, groundwater management decisions are required to consider the environmental flow needs or that required volume of water for the stream to function properly. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are 4 provincially mapped aquifers in the Sechelt area, 2 bedrock aquifers on either side of the inlet, each of which are partially overlain by a sand and gravel aquifer. This table here presents some basic information about each of those 4 aquifers, including some characteristics associated with those topics that I just introduced. And there's a lot more detailed information available on each of these aquifers in our groundwater database, which is referred to as GWELS, and I've put a link at the bottom there as well. So for these 4 aquifers, 3 out of 4 of them are at least partially overlain by fine-grained sediments such as silt or till, and therefore they're characterized as being confined or partially confined. However, aquifer 566 in many areas is not overlain by any fine-grained sediments and is characterized as an unconfined aquifer. Because it's unconfined, it is likely to be connected with streams or surface waters that are in the area. And it also is characterized as having a high vulnerability to contamination. I also just want to point out that for the 2 sand and gravel aquifers, the productivity of these aquifers is uncertain. We don't have a lot of data available to fully characterize the productivity of these aquifers at this time. Based on observations of geology, it's possible that there's areas of high productivity in this aquifer, but we just don't have enough information to fully characterize those at the moment. And I also want to highlight that for the bedrock aquifers, there's some information that suggests that there's potential for high arsenic concentrations in groundwater, as well as for artesian conditions to occur in bedrock in the Sunshine Coast area generally. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So lastly, I just wanted to let you know and highlight that we will have a new public report being published soon on our Water Science Series website. And this report includes a case study of Aquifer 566 that was done by Hatfield Consultants, which included a desktop assessment of Aquifer 566 using available data. An example of one of the recommendations that came out of this report was to divide the aquifer into 4 groundwater management areas that are shown on the figure here for assessing groundwater availability in the aquifer. This report did identify that there may be potential constraints on groundwater availability in this aquifer. For example, I mentioned the uncertainty about the aquifer's productivity. There's complex geology that varies throughout the aquifer, and as well, there's the potential for stream flow depletion from streams such as Chapman Creek, Wilson Creek, and Ergens Creek. And it's likely that the environmental flow needs of these streams may need to be considered as well in a groundwater management decision. The references of those reports I've included here, even though there's no link yet as they're not published, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention as a future resource to refer to. And that's all of the information that I have here. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Council. I think this is before us for questions, education, information. A lot to absorb. We didn't get the second report until now, but we can circulate that, I guess, if you need it. Sure. Ms. Ball, could you put the last presentation up on the last slide? Is Councillor Inkster's request. And do you have a question on that? Your microphone.
But I'm glad that's come back up if it does with the map, the 1, 2, 3, 4. Just want to read the purple, what the change in purple means more clearly. The earlier presentation that was made by, I guess, Mr. Jackson referenced the groundwater change in our community, I believe, down 26 down to 32 meters.
No,
Was
that was
referencing
that was
some
Langley,
clarity?
I believe.
Yeah, clarity. Good, thank you. And that there was, he had used that as an indication of some changes in groundwater availability at higher, closer to the ground, is what the indication was, correct?
What I
he's
heard
probably there.
was a reference to that was an example from if Mr. Jackson is with us.
Yeah.
Was from
Yeah.
Langley.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a long-term trend analysis from Langley. So we can
Okay.
only do that sort of analysis once there's at least 10 years of mostly complete data. Otherwise, it wouldn't be statistically valid. So obviously, the sooner we get observation wells in, the sooner we will have enough data to start doing fancier and fancier analyses. So the ones in Sechelt were only installed about 2.5 years ago. So we still don't have enough data to do a long-term trend analysis for that area yet. But that's down in Mission Point Park.
You can see it from the Highway Council if you haven't. The
Yes.
2 wells with the solar panels and a no parking sign right beside it.
Yeah, I saw that on the weekend and I wasn't sure why that was there, but that's okay.
It was to keep electric vehicles from parking during a
Mhm.
picnic.
Doesn't go along with
Oh.
water, electricity and water. That could be it.
Council, other questions? Councillor McLaughlin? Okay, Councillor Bell. please.
Yeah, through the chair, just the mention in the report that around productivity, that you're not completely aware of what the productivity is of these aquifers, and there's not enough data to give you that information. Will that data be available at some point, or what will that look like in the future?
For sure. So oftentimes, because groundwater is in the subsurface, it's difficult to see. And so we rely on groundwater wells for collecting information about what is going on in the subsurface, the geology, and the groundwater conditions. So as of yet, there aren't that many well records that we have in our database for these aquifers. And so there are some drillers' estimates of well productivity that indicate low productivity for a few wells. However, it's just not enough information to say that the whole aquifer has low productivity. It's just a few data points. Sometimes the drillers' estimates of well yields too, they're not technical tests. They're just kind of a rough estimate of how much water they can produce out of the well when they first construct it. And so what we would do is on a groundwater license application, we would assess it on a site-specific basis. So if a well is installed and they're requesting a certain volume of water, we would request a pumping test or testing from that well to demonstrate sufficient productivity in order to supply the requested flow. So it somewhat relies on groundwater wells being installed and that data coming through to our office.
Great, thank you.
Maybe you could, something I saw was a reference to potential arsenic and artesian activity. Is artesian activity good or bad?
Yes, I'll just maybe quickly comment on the arsenic. So that is from a 1994 study that was across the Sunshine Coast and identified some areas of bedrock with potential arsenic. It's not necessarily focused on this, the Sechelt area. And for artesian conditions, so this is when the hydraulic head or the pressure of the water in the aquifer is high enough that the pressure of that aquifer would be above the ground surface if you were to drill into it. And so, and this occurs in confined aquifers or in deeper bedrock situations. And it is often a challenge to deal with, and it requires a greater level of expertise from the driller and the well installer who's working with that well. There was a case in Vancouver where an artesian condition could not be controlled, and it was very expensive, and it was left flowing. It can have a large liability. So it's best to know at the outset when you might encounter artesian conditions so that you can be prepared to handle that flow properly.
So it's bad if you don't know, but it could be good, I would assume, because, sorry, folks, I'm looking at her on my screen. So it's good in the sense if you can control it, then you don't need much pumping to get the water to the surface.
That's correct. Yeah, the well can flow without a pump. You do need to install a specialized wellhead in order to maintain the flow when the well is not in operation.
Okay, no, thank you.
We do have some resources on that topic as well that I didn't link in my presentation, but I can forward them to someone if they're interested.
Well, we're all interested in water. I think I can say that for sure. Anything else, council? Microphone, please. Yes.
No problem. So I'm going to, because the report just came now, the second piece, as long as, and I guess that's Ms. Sandal that created that because she spoke to it, is that hopefully if I can get a hold of that, your contact information will be there attached so that I can maybe ask you some questions.
Sure. Yes, my full name and position is in there.
We can arrange that. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, great. Any last comments either from either of you about Mission Point, since that's the one we all know and see? I mean, how deep is it? Why did you choose there? What do you hope to achieve? I heard, you're waiting for many years of data before it's really valid, but are there any early wins or learnings?
So the reason we picked there is because we're really limited in where we install these wells. It has to be on public property that the local government will give us permission to drill on, that's accessible by a drill rig, that's not going to be developed for the foreseeable future. So we don't always get to drill in the most ideal spots. And Mission Park was probably the only place we could really install these wells in that area. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. But that's kind of why we did it. It was a big open park and it's accessible and no one's going to be redeveloping them. We installed the two wells at different depths. The deeper you go, the more pressure there is. I originally wanted to drill into the bedrock aquifer, but then we realized the artesian pressure was going to be quite significant and we weren't prepared for that. It makes it incredibly complicated to monitor such a well. And we also didn't want to run the risk of damaging the park. What we have seen is that the deeper well is seasonally artesian. It will come up above the ground for part of the year. That's why the well, you'll notice, is kind of tall. That was intentional because we didn't want it to flow out the top of the well. So it just comes up about a foot or so above the ground. And there was some, I'm a bit curious to see, because we have it all mapped as one aquifer. I'd be curious to, once there's enough data, to see if that points us in the direction of, well, are there actually two unconsolidated aquifers or it's just one? And once there's enough data, like I said, you can do more interesting analyses to better understand the hydrogeology, including combining our data set with any sort of hydrometric station set up on Chapman Creek, because in all likelihood, the aquifer and Chapman Creek are hydraulically connected. So in due time, there will be more interest findings.
Great, Councillor Inkster, one more.
Yeah, thanks. Just because you talked about the one that's clearly there, I was just wondering if they considered West Seashelt, upper part of Norwest Bay, where there might be road rights of ways, because they were looking for property, public property.
Suppose
Yeah.
that's, do you have your preferred choices? Quick, briefly?
So part of the reason we wanted to pick this kind of southern portion of this aquifer 566 is because there was simply more going on. There were more users as opposed to other areas that are much more sparsely populated or less used. So we did want to focus on that southern area, closer to that Mission Point area. And within that southern portion of the aquifer, there just weren't a lot. Like a lot of the road right-of-ways, for example, have ditches on either side, or there's just not enough space for a drill rig, or we couldn't get permission from this person or that person. So we were limited, which isn't to say that there aren't other aquifers or other parts of this aquifer where it would be
Right.
useful to have a well.
Mr. Jackson, sorry,
Yep.
just, we've got a lot on our agenda. So
Sorry, yeah.
do you have other preferred, like, would you like to be in West Seashelt in terms of growing out these observation network, the network of observation wells? Where's your next
Potentially,
target?
we would have to do more research. So that would be a discussion with Elise and some of the other South Coast staff.
Okay, great. I think that's, so not, I heard that. Did you? Yes. Yep. Yep. Great. Anything else, council? No? Okay, then with thanks to both of you, wherever I look to see you, thanks for this. Lots of data, and we look forward to further updates.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks. Council, I think we then go to item 5.1, which is the rezoning application at 5700 East Porpoise Bay Road. And we have that with Mr. Kobowitz assuming the position and looking for a microphone. And this, as you read, council, on page 13 is got some recommendations from staff. Mr. Kobowitz, I guess the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a brief presentation and that'll be followed at your discretion by a presentation by the applicants who are in the gallery tonight as well. As noted, this is a rezoning application for 5700 East Porpoise Bay Road. The location is an assembly of 4 separate properties that front East Porpoise Bay Road, Wharf Avenue, and Trident Avenue. As illustrated in the map up there. The property is currently occupied by a collection of single-family dwellings, and all of those would, of course, need to be removed for this development to proceed. From a land use context, it is located presently all zoned R4, which is our urban infill zone. This allows for single-family dwellings or duplexes, as well as infill cottages. The OCP designation for the property is split. The area adjacent to Wharf Avenue is in the downtown center designation. So commercial and mixed uses are supported in that area. And the rear properties that are on East Porpoise Bay and Trident Avenue are designated as mixed residential multifamily. So the proposal at this stage is preliminary, but the developer has put forward a proposal of 4 separate apartment type buildings. Building A would be a mixed use building with ground floor commercial fronting Wharf Avenue, more pedestrian oriented frontage. And above that would be rental accommodations. So one bedroom unit and 3 2-bedroom units. Building B is a dedicated rental building with 22 1-bedroom units and 14 2-bedroom units. And finally, building C would be a full market condo ownership building with 25 2-bedroom units. And building D, which fronts Trident Avenue, is a 16 one-bedroom units and 8 two-bedroom units. The buildings are all generally 4 to 5 stories, except for the lower building along Wharf Avenue to kind of give a more pedestrian-friendly experience along Wharf. In total, it's 89 residential units and about 400 square meters of retail space on the first floor of the Wharf Avenue building. So to proceed with this proposal, an OCP amendment bylaw would be required. This is seeking a higher level of density in respect of units per hectare than is currently entertained in the official community plan. So the maximum density under the current official community plan is 100 units per hectare. And this proposal, in order to achieve the 89 units, would require an increase of that number to 159 units per hectare. This is fairly in range for most of the multifamily apartments that have been approved in recent years, including Green Court, Community Services, the TELUS building. They're all generally in the 150 to 200 unit per hectare range. And it seems to be that is the density that's required to make projects viable in the current economic climate for construction. This would also invoke policy 6.13 in the OCP, where increased height of up to 6 stories is supported in areas where appropriate. In addition, for detailed land use regulations, the zoning amendment bylaw would be required. Staff are currently proposing a site-specific zone, CD8, in order to accommodate this multi-building complex. It utilizes density bonusing in order to secure the rental housing, in which case a housing agreement would be required. And further, there is a reduced parking supply currently requested that would provide 85 off-street parking spaces in an underground parkade. The maximum height permitted on the property would be 25 meters or 6 stories with a maximum lot coverage of 50%. Staff are recommending that the committee endorse additional information requirements for this application should it proceed. That includes a water supply, demand reduction, and conservation report that would assess a number of different opportunities for water conservation on the property and within the units themselves, including rainwater collection, irrigation, landscaping, and potentially gray water reuse where appropriate. As well, we are seeking a transportation impact assessment and parking study to support the required parking reduction and to assess the adequacy of existing infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and potential upgrades that might be required. A preliminary servicing report is being required that would assess the servicing capacity of existing infrastructure in the area, including stormwater, sewer, and frontage improvements that might be required. And then finally, a shadow study should be provided in order to assess impacts on adjacent properties, considering the increased height of the buildings. And a community amenity contribution offer letter is also sought in order to confirm the developer's intention to follow council policy or to have a negotiated CAC contribution with this project. One of the next steps we're recommending would also be a public information meeting. This is a developer hosted meeting to gather initial feedback on the proposal from the public. Development signs will be posted on the property along with newspaper advertisements. Notifications would be sent out to the neighborhood and notices posted on social media and our website as well. So the next steps for the committee are to consider this application and potentially forward direct council to provide readings at the next available council meeting. Staff would undertake further referrals of the bylaws themselves to stakeholders, and a public information meeting would be scheduled. At some point in the future, we would come back with the additional information that's been requested from the developer, present that to council at second reading, after which a public hearing could be scheduled. I do want to note that in the report on page 4 of the report, there is a typo on the FAR. It's notes 2.4, but that was including the underground parking, which is exempt under bylaw 580.
Sorry, that's presumably on page 17 of our agenda.
Yes, sorry, I don't have the agenda here.
Mhm.
So it is the correct number that is required for this development is 1.5, FAR of 1.5. The current OCP supports up to 1.4, so it's a slight increase in the floor area ratio that's permitted. And additionally, I also found an error in the OCP amendment bylaw, which notes an FAR of 1.6. That should be 1.5, but that would be corrected before it comes back to council. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Koberitz. So you mentioned, is the developer have some new information?
I'll give the developer has some more detailed information around the particularly the proposal itself, as far as the programming of the units themselves, the energy efficiency that are proposed to be incorporated into the units. So a little bit beyond the general land use overview I've given you. So I'll pass it over
right.
to them. if
Great.
that's-
Who's going to do that? Mr. Nadeau. How are you? Yep. Great.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm Rod Nadeau. I'm one of the proponents. And I've got a short presentation with some slides. And it's mostly to go over the design principles, the unit size, and I'll touch a little bit on the energy efficiency and sustainability. And I'll see if I can just organize sharing my screen.
Yep. Well, there we go. Yep. That's good.
Yeah, I'm not getting the slides showing up here. There. Let's try.
Great.
There, okay. Now if I can get to my notes, that would be good. Well, I can't seem to find my notes, so I'll try this without notes.
All right.
So the design principle behind this was to create a whole community with a whole range of units and some small commercial uses to enable people to rent a small studio up to ownership of a 1,300 square foot 2-bedroom and den unit. And the commercial was designed along the Wharf Street to continue the commercial. The 2-story building was chosen so that it's not too imposing. And it's well set back from the sidewalk. And as you come around the corner under Porpoise Bay, the next building is a 4-story. And then it steps up as you get further into the site to the 5-story. And then over on Trident Street, it steps back down to the 4-story. I got a little slideshow here that kind of walks you around starting on Wharf Street. And the first thing you see as you come up here is the walkway, because the site is completely interconnected from all access points on all the streets. So now you're looking at the commercial with some balconies above with the 2 stories residential above. And as you come around the corner, that space is programmed to be a coffee shop, which will be basically a local coffee shop. And there's enough people living within a 5-minute walk of there to make that a thriving place. And that rounded part of the building is the focal point of the commercial in the corner. And we've set the building back from the sidewalk to create more sidewalk to allow seating on the sidewalk and some planting. And then as we go past the commercial building, now we're starting to step into the more private area for the residential. The first building you see there is the rental building. And in front of the rental building, we've got a little sort of playground and park area and landscaped area. And then you can see Porpoise Bay starts to drop in elevation. So the access at that point is a set of stairs. And then as we continue around, The entrance to the underground parking is pretty much at grade because the site drops off 3 meters from the elevation of Wharf Street and the elevation of Trident Street. So that allowed a nice, easy entrance into an underground parking. And we put pretty well all the cars underground so that our site planning was based on pedestrians and people-friendly design first. So this here is the landscape plan, and you'll note there's no cars on it. So they're all tucked underneath. We have a community garden behind Building D, and it happens to be in a location where there's a thriving garden there today. And those garden boxes will be accessible to all the owners or tenants in the various buildings. And we have found over the years that that is the most used amenity we've ever put in any building. It also fosters a very good sense of community because it's a great gathering place and people tend to be out taking care of their gardens. And it's all part of the kind of pedestrian network. So if you look at the pedestrian network, we're tying Trident Street into the building, which ties into the next buildings and then wraps around on both sides. So the Porpoise Bay is much more active with the playground, gathering areas, seating areas, gazebo, some covered areas. And the one behind the buildings that connects through to Wharf is more of a private path. So there's just a picture of one of our projects with the community garden, very well used. And then this is a picture of the garden boxes that we're going to have in that great location. Despite the 3-story building right behind it, that's a very sunny location and the garden there is thriving today. There's just another view of the building onto Trident where you can see the community garden. On that building, we've elected to do a flat roof and have a little bit more community garden up there and some seating areas on the roof to increase the public spaces. There's just a better rendering of what that building will look like. And this is where we have put all the cars. The underground is all interconnected. There is one entrance off of Porpoise Bay, and then the buildings are connected under the landscaped areas. The yellow areas are the lower lobby areas, mechanical rooms, elevator, and then some of the spaces are dedicated for mechanical, bike storage, and storage. And we've got closed garages and open parking in there. The closed garages are one of the best features if you are downsizing out of your single family home into a condo style living. You know, you need room to put all your stuff. You know, your bikes, your cars, your skis, your Christmas decorations. There's just a look at what another building where we have the underground parking. So you drive in and you got your own little garage and they're very well used. There's just a picture of what they look like before they get filled up with stuff. One of the things that we found extremely useful in apartment condo style living is we put a workbench in. So we've got our bike storage there, a workbench, it's a ski tuning bench. It's set up for ski tuning. We've got a bike stand there and we supply all the tools. So that not everybody has to have bike pumps and all the tools required. It's also a great place if you have a piece of furniture you want to refinish, you can go down there and do it and not do it on your dining room table. Also, all the units have on the ground floor private backyards, small yards, and we provide all the gardening equipment that you would need for cutting grass or maintaining your garden. This is the units that are in our rental building, and we have quite a range of units from small studios to, you know, some small 1-bedrooms, larger 1-bedrooms, small 2-bedroom, larger 2-bedrooms. And this is really designed to have a whole range of people who can afford to live there. And so it's going to attract young singles who might not necessarily own a car working in the restaurants. So, you know, this is a walkable location to downtown in most of the jobs here. And then as you get into the bigger units, You know, could be a shared situation or it could be a family. Then here's just a quick picture of some of the larger units. These are more aimed at people who might want to be downsizing out of their single family home into one level condominium living. Here's just another range of units that are in the other for sale building on Trident. This was the inspiration for our studio. A friend of mine developed this down in California. That looked awesome, but it's really this picture that shows, you know, I could live in a studio like that. You know, they've thought of pretty much everything, so we just kind of copied it and did that for our studio. There's more storage in there than most 2-bedroom apartments. This is the apartment building. We've got 3 studios at the bottom of the screen that line up on all 4 stories, so we get 12 studios. So they'll be the most affordable units in the building. And we've got, you know, some 2s on the corner, some smaller 1-bedrooms and some larger 1-bedrooms. So it's really designed to have a wide range of unit types and sizes and prices so that we have, you know, a whole range of people living there, from young singles to families to retired people. Getting into the sustainability side, this is our project in Golden that we finished 1 building in November. The next building will be finished next week. And those 2 heat pumps on there heat and cool a 30,000 square foot building. And the big air handling unit does all the ventilation. Now, in our new buildings, we've taken all that equipment, downsized it a little bit, and we're sticking it into the roof. So it's not sitting up on top of a flat roof. Those are attic trusses, and that equipment is mostly hidden inside the roof structure. It's a great place for a mechanical room. You can't see it. You know, the noise is no longer an issue, and it allows us a little more diversity in the design, not having to do flat roofs for this equipment. There's just a quick picture of the hot water heat pumps. We don't have a problem putting those anywhere because they're so quiet. That's my friend listening to try to tell if it's actually running. So that gives us a lot of versatility. And so we don't have any gas in our buildings anymore. They're all electric. Our buildings in Pemberton heat for between $30 and $50 a year. And in the heat wave summer, the air conditioning was $30 for the entire summer. So it's not that hard to build high performance buildings. The equipment's gotten better in the last few years, and we've gotten a lot better at utilizing it and designing our buildings to accommodate it. That's probably our most popular unit in both our for sale building and our rental. It's a small 2-bedroom. And, you know, that means the price point's a little better and it's open to, you know, easily, you know, 2 people can share that and have a reasonable rent. And I'll just end with a few pictures of what that unit actually looks like. And oversized windows everywhere. And they are triple pane, Passive House certified, triple weather sealed windows. So when we close those doors, because it's on some busy streets, it's quiet. You'll see the cars go by, but you won't hear them. And there's just a picture, you know, we make sure all of our bedrooms are actually big enough to accommodate a queen size bed. So we're not doing any 8-foot by 9-foot bedrooms. You know, the minimum space in the bedrooms is 10 by 10 plus closets. So, you know, that's the end of my presentation. And the design is really focused around people first.
Great.
Do you have any questions?
Good. I'm sure we'll get to them. That's my line, actually. Council, any questions? Councillor Shepherd.
Firstly, thanks very much for giving us the presentation and for the innovation that you've introduced to the buildings. It's really a terrific thing, I think, for the town. Just a couple of questions. I guess that came out of the APC. I think they were in favor of the project, but they were suggesting that there was that the developer look at the heights of the buildings or suggesting there was some concern over that. And secondly, on transportation, are you assuming that I see there's a right in, right out of one of the buildings on the Porpoise Bay Road, but does that mean that 4-way stop becomes signalized, or is that still yet to be determined?
That's yet to be determined. We've been working our site plan with a transportation plan for the corner of Wharf and Porpoise that has been in the works for I don't know how long. We just inherited it when we started working on the project. As to the height of the buildings, we really wanted to step them up as we step back from Wharf so that we didn't put the highest building on the corner. And we kept the commercial and the walkway in the corner a little lower, a little more human scaled. And as we step further into the site, we step the buildings up. And the most efficient, apartment building is in the 4 to 6 story range. And we've elected not to go above 5 stories. There's a lot of efficiencies at staying at 5 stories and under.
Is that okay? Yeah, yeah, please.
Sorry, just
Yeah,
one
yeah.
follow-up question. Lots of innovation in terms of heat pumps and so forth. What about water? Do you look at conservation measures, cisterns, things like that? Thank you.
The fundamentals are we use low flow fixtures. And so we start with that. Because we're going to have a hard surface on the whole site, we'll be collecting all the rainwater from the site, and we'll be storing that underground under the parkade. It's not very difficult. You dig a big hole, fill with drain rock, put a perforated manhole down there, and then we can put a submersible pump in there and use that for our irrigation water. So, water conservation is very much on our mind. Stormwater management, that system, will be designed for a 10-year storm event. So that in a 10-year storm event, we'll be able to store and re-infiltrate into the ground all the water out of those storm events and store, as much as we can for future use.
Okay, great, thanks. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, through the chair, and thank you again for the presentation. It's, as you say, very well done, and it certainly addresses some of the needs of this community in terms of our needs assessment or housing needs assessment, in terms of studio 1 and 2 bedrooms. Just picking up on what Councillor Shepherd said, I guess my only flag, and you did mention you're working on this, is the traffic assessment to be done on that corner. As I understand that there hasn't been one done since 2017 on that corner of Wharf and East Corpus Bay. And I can certainly attest to living out there.
Question?
Yeah, that the traffic is considerable on that corner. So I'm not sure whether a controlled intersection is going to be needed there, but I certainly would like, some good assessment done on that. So it doesn't become a real congested area. A lot of big trucks, et cetera, use that as well. So just want to flag that.
I'm very aware of the trucks,
Yeah.
which is one of the other reasons for the triple weather sealed quiet windows.
Right on. Great.
And our goal really with this project is to present a very good alternative to not having to use your car every day. It's the right location for a walkable neighborhood. The commercial we're putting in there, we are going to put a coffee shop on the corner. At APC, a few of the architects flagged that the commercial wouldn't be successful with a lot of parking out front. But we're not looking to do destination commercial. We're just looking to do neighborhood commercial that's going to service people within, 5 to 15-minute walk or bike ride from there.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Council, other questions? Councillor McLaughlin?
Yes, thank you through the chair. I'm just wondering, what kind of other projects have you done?
To me,
Just-
please, Councillor
just-
McLaughlin. To
Right.
me, please speak to
Well-
me. Yes, thank you.
Well,
Mhm.
I'm addressing him,
No,
the questions are to
you
him.
Ask of me.
So, it seems to me they're more mountain resort. There's more of a mountain aesthetic here. I was just wondering if you looked into what kind of sales you had there. Was it more for short-term rentals, for people taking advantage of those recreation opportunities? And
Okay, so the question is, where else has the
Yes.
developer done business?
well, and also how have you applied that thinking to Seashell, which really doesn't have any real skiing per se, as other places do, Golden and Whistler.
All right.
And, how has the design been reflecting our context here? Now, for instance, we're by the ocean, which Whistler and Golden aren't. And one issue here is definitely sea rise. So I'm wondering if you took into account those issues and storm surges and heat domes. So that's a very important factor. Also, I'm just wondering how sustainable building private garages is. I've never seen that before, but for myself, in terms of sustainability, I need more convincing on that. I know people like to store stuff,
Okay.
but they also need to find somewhere to park their car because we can't put everybody on the street. So there is a huge
So
noise issue there.
that's three
Yeah.
questions. Yeah.
Well, and just your own opinions about the noise issue. I mean, the float planes take off down Wharf. Wharf is a
Okay.
designated route.
We've heard,
And the
we've heard you
gravel
speak
truck.
about float planes before.
Well,
Other
I'm
questions?
talking about them now because that's their main,
No, but you've
route.
expressed your concerns about float
well,
planes.
and
So
I'm doing it again because this development to me is probably the worst part of Sea Shelf in terms of noise
Okay.
and
something else, Councillor
issues like
McLaughlin?
that. I don't know if triple glazed windows are really going to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Anything else?
in terms of enjoying outdoor space, I didn't see a lot of balconies. Like I think people come here for nature and balconies. So was that to kind of reduce the noise and the impacts of noise there?
So
Because I noticed
balconies, yeah.
the
Anything?
balconies on or maybe on Trident frontage, but I don't see them elsewhere.
All right.
And also one last thing is, wasn't this property already rezoned for R4, which is, quite a large upzoning from what it was. And then also this is like a 50% increase in OCP designation for density. That is not an insignificant amount of density. It's a lot. And so
Thank you.
I just
Any-
wonder how you see that in terms of how it will contribute to the community in terms of amenities, because it is a very large development for here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's, Mr. Nadeau, I think the issue of zoning is one for staff. I think I'm right. There are balconies in several of the units.
There's balconies in every unit other than the studios.
Thank you. Noise, I think frankly, that's buyers are well aware and you've commented on the noise vis-a-vis trucks at ground level. So and none of us are noise engineers or scientists. So private garages. You've done them elsewhere, obviously. I saw that.
We've been doing private garages for a dozen years now. And they're one of the best amenities
Mhm.
for
Okay.
condo living because in a condo, with 2 bedrooms and 3 closets, where do you put all your stuff?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you've done them and they've been successful in
We've
your
done them
experience.
for a dozen years. They've been very successful.
Right.
In terms of environmental, Pemberton hit 46 degrees for 3 days in a row during the heat dome in 2021. And our building got to a maximum of 25 degrees at the end of the afternoon.
Right.
We had it down to 21, 22 every night.
Very good.
So, we're actually designing to a 2050 climate model. So we're designing more for cooling than heating now.
Right.
That's a change that, was a shock to me. My entire career has been about heating.
Yeah.
And now it's all about shading and cooling.
Okay, there were 2 other questions. Sea level rise. Is there anything specific you've been doing or considering in this development?
We're high enough, I would hope. If our
Mhm.
building goes underwater, we have a real problem.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
we're quite a ways up. And the only thing, at the level of Porpoise Bay Road is the underground parking.
Mhm. Okay.
And we built a lot of floodplains, so one of the reasons all our mechanical rooms are up on the roof is when we're building in a floodplain location, gets our mechanical out of there.
And last but not least, where would you like to highlight you've done business?
Well, I've done business. I've probably built 1,000 units in Whistler in the last 40 years. We've been Kicking Horse Resort Mountains Development Partner, once again, another ski resort. But we also build in Pemberton. And we build in downtown Golden. So we're not just, ski resort
Right.
mountain developers.
Right.
I used to build very high-end, multi-million-dollar custom homes. And I found it a lot more rewarding to build homes that normal people with a regular job could afford.
Right.
And that's what we specialized in for the last dozen years.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to save the rezoning question. Any other questions for Mr. Nadeau? Counselor Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't hear how high those buildings were in those other towns. I'm really interested. How you successfully build high buildings. You want us to go through you, so if you want me to
Yes,
go
yeah, sure.
through you
Yep.
and hopefully Mr. Nadeau quickly, obviously you built them, so
Yeah.
Golden's how big, Rebels,
Height.
yeah, how tall?
The buildings in Golden are 4 stories.
Okay,
So 1 story of commercial.
Yeah.
And 3 stories of residential.
yeah, and
In
Pemberton,
Pemberton, there were 3 stories.
okay.
Okay, so
And-
what, next question?
Sure. I'm glad that the building is, you've recognized and people are starting to recognize built for cooling
Mhm.
with the window thickness. Because a lot of buildings are being built with glass and we're having trouble now with cooling buildings. So we're using energy, et cetera, to do that now, which was well, once again, another global warming issue. I like the look of this building. I think it's too bad this property was located where it was, because I could see this building in the center of the community with what you've done with it, like with the connectivity. And as long as you allow people to go through your property, it would look really good for people coming through your property to utilize it, just because of the use you've made in a number of buildings. So I do like the look of it. And I like how you've tried it all together. It would be good in the center of a community because you're sidewalking and that. My concerns, I like the roof line, I like the building materials used, is going to be Trident for me in the building there, and the shadowing and the work we may need to do on Trident.
So we'll get to look at that with the shadow study, I assume.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it'll be interesting to see that. That's where I think the issues will be with that. And I hope maybe they'll use the Legion for their public outreach because it's close to all those people, because that will be where we'll hear the concerns. So I've said my positives, but the other thing that I'm just red flagging is, I asked about height, and the other things is the parking.
Mhm.
That's where I think there's going to be issues with Trident and Ebb Tide. That's where the parking will end up, I can predict. So I'm just flagging it, and we'll engage with the community, but like I said, it has a lot of great ideas. I'm just
Okay, so
seeing
your
what could
concern
happen.
is maybe some people will choose to park outside.
I think a lot of people will.
And so on Trident in the plans, there are 15 spaces on Trident. Is that right?
I'm not sure the exact number.
Yeah.
It's probably closer to 10 on Trident.
Yeah,
And
Yeah,
the rest are under the building.
right.
yeah, I think
right.
it's a little
So-
more, like a little more than that, but from the lines, but
Okay,
yeah, but
so that's a
anyway.
concern. And
It's just
with-
what we're gonna see. We will see that there's a lot of people going to be living in those buildings, which is good. We need to house people and we need to do it in a smart, sustainable manner, but they will have to park somewhere.
Great, thank you. Okay, any other questions, folks? Counselor Rowe.
Thank you for your presentation. So many great innovations in this project. I'm curious with the rental units. Do people have to pay their own utilities? Because I imagine your utility costs are pretty low. I know that might be an odd question, but do you include that with the rents, or are people paying them on the side?
We have elected with all our utilities to include them in the rent. When we do that, there are substantial savings available. This building will probably save $10,000 a year just in BC, like each building. In BC Hydro charges from having a commercial meter to individual residential. So we don't utilities are part of your rent. You have to look at it that way. If we can lower them, then our rents will actually overall be lower. And so in our last 4 buildings, we've included, whether it's in a for sale building where it's just part of your strata fees, or in a rental building that's part of your rent. So the only thing you have to pay for over and above your rent will be your internet.
That's great. Well, I'm happy. I think a lot of Councillor Inkster's voiced concerns are going to be answered by but not before we move recommendations. So I'd like to move recommendations 1 and 2.
Thank you. I see a seconder. Okay. Any questions on that? Counselor Inkster?
I'm okay with moving it, and I wasn't sure what Councillor Rowe meant by answered by, maybe she means the public information process. Just one more question through you to the proponents is the 2-floor building on Wharf, the business on the bottom and 1 floor up above with the roof. Roof looks good, by the way, but I don't get it. But I don't understand why you'd go so small there. But anyway. Okay. I would go higher. Yeah.
All right. Yes, Counselor McLaughlin.
We can have comments, right, at this point?
Yes. Questions and debate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm just looking through the chair. I'm looking for that listing of studio apartments. I don't really see them listed. I see 1 bedroom once listed.
No, it's in there. You've got the schematics of the different layouts.
Wow, the counts, I don't see it.
Okay.
In terms of the counts,
So-
they're all called 1 bedroom and to me, they're not. And also I didn't get an answer on the previous zoning. I believe I remember seeing the sign there
I'm
for a long
coming to that.
time.
So
So I
What
know
else?
it was rezoned over the last number of years for that. In terms of transit, et cetera, and being walkable, I actually went there yesterday and was thinking about whether people really will walk for groceries and et cetera. And it's not our most pleasant walk at all. In fact, it's probably our least pleasant walk. So I'm kind of afraid, given the location and the amount of noise, that people will not really walk. They just won't enjoy that walk. And they'll drive or, it won't,
Okay.
and the transit isn't very good. I looked at the transit. The transit is a 7-minute route that goes to the arena, and that's basically what it is.
Mhm.
It doesn't run very often. So they're not really great
Okay.
benefits, it seems,
Counselor.
unless you could
thank
tell me
Counselor
otherwise.
Shepherd.
Just to contest that, sorry to the chair. I live on East Porpoise Bay Road. I walk by that all the time. It's not pleasant because there are trucks going along there. But I think what the proponent has proposed will improve it dramatically. And it'll add walking infrastructure. It'll make it a much better place to walk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, okay, Counselor Bill.
Through the chair, I'm just going to support that.
Okay.
Being that I do come along Porpoise Bay Road a lot, there are a lot of people that walk along.
Okay,
So-
great, thank you. I wanted to just hear perhaps Mr. Diddle, thank you. Maybe you can hand over the microphone to Mr. Kobowitz. And thanks for your presentation. Okay, and yeah.
Okay.
Just if, thanks very much. So the question about rezoning, I think, was more about a history that has been rezoned previously. Is this too much density? I think was the reference.
So the history on this property is that there have been various rezoning applications through the years, going back to 2016, I believe. None of them have proceeded past public hearing. So this is the property has never been rezoned. The original zoning from bylaw 25 was carried over. It used to be the R2 zone, which allowed for duplexes, and that's what the R4 zone essentially currently is, a mirror of that previous zone. So there hasn't been any upzoning of the property per se.
Mhm. Okay.
I think there was some other questions as well. but
Well, the
maybe you could-
density's a little bit higher, but
Yeah, the density is definitely an increase, and that would be noted as per council policy on the CAC contribution, as well as the provision of rental housing. But the density increase is generally in line with what we've seen over the past few years with multifamily living in the downtown area.
okay, thank you. Yes, Counselor Bill. Oh, I saw that on.
Oops, sorry.
Okay, Counselor McLaughlin, something new, please.
Yes, thank you to the chair. I'm just concerned that it is another upzoning and that it may not be built. That
yes, it is.
It is a benefit to the developer to upzone. And we have a lot of properties that have been vacant for a long time that have been rezoned. So, I would like to have that sunset clause idea brought forward, which we requested and administration said they would bring forward to discourage that sort of thing. Also, we're always complaining as a council that we do not have enough commercial base. And it seems to me that corner location is much better, especially along Wharf and Porpoise Bay Road for commercial development. Also, commercial development, it's more shorter term. It
I
isn't,
think the comment
it
has been
isn't-
industrial.
well,
We're looking
industrial
for
and
industrial.
commercial. We do need more commercial space is what we're always saying. We're looking for that tax base. And it seems to me this is a key location that we're just
Okay.
not getting the benefit of. So I think that's a kind of a contradiction there. And I would rather see the Trident properties shown, the houses and also the Wharf development in the drawings that currently exists as a fairly new multifamily development in those pictures, because it's not open green space. It's quite highly developed already. And I think those properties will be quite dramatically impacted. If we just show them visually, it'll be very, very helpful to see that. So I do not support this at this time.
Yes. Understood.
And I just think we have severe water problems.
No.
One thing that we were going to
Counselor-
talk about was
Counselor
the water
McLaughlin,
budget.
We're not going to talk about water anymore today.
Well,
Your views on that are well known, so
well,
we're going to
the
move on.
point is, this
So
is
you have
another
something- you
development
have
in the
something new?
hopper that's going to use water.
Counselor
My
Mc-
constituents are saying
Counselor
they don't want to
McLaughlin.
see more development.
Counselors,
Not
you ready for
stop
the
talking
question?
about that.
All in favor? Opposed, Councillor McLaughlin is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Nadeau and Mr. Kobowitz. Now, council, we go to item 5.2. And have to admit, now I get an idea of who's presenting. Oh, come on up. All right, thank you, guys. All right, so Ms. Lee, you're leading this one?
Yes, thank you. Just waiting for our slides to come up here, but
Okay.
I would like to introduce Hannah Ombre. She's our climate adaptation and resilience analyst intern. Hannah comes to us to the district from the School of Community and Regional Planning at the University of British Columbia. And she's working with us for a 13-week term to complete this targeted project. So I'll hand it over to Hannah to make the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Aim for there. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. So first, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the purpose of this work. So the district has recognized the need to respond to climate change and has been making efforts. However, a climate change response plan has yet to be developed. Currently, the district has highlighted the importance of taking action on climate change in the Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, the OCP, the Development Application Sustainability Checklist, and the Building Bylaw. Further work has been done to address natural hazards in some of the existing development permit areas. But my work intended to set the stage for action on climate change and set out different pathways for climate response. The outcomes of this report include a report and recommendations, which are being developed to identify gaps in current bylaws and policies, to understand what other municipalities across Canada are doing, and then to integrate climate adaptation into the district's bylaws and policies through both short and long-term recommendations. So generally, one of the key challenges for municipalities across Canada is coping with the impacts of climate change and natural hazards. In British Columbia, the effects of climate change are already being felt and are expected to cause further warming and shifts in extreme weather. So climate change responses normally take two approaches, either mitigation or adaptation. So mitigation is understood as a human intervention to either reduce the sources or enhance the sinks of greenhouse gases, whereas adaptation intends to minimize or avoid the impacts of climate change by human or natural interventions. And discussions of adaptation will be central to a lot of my work in this presentation, but mitigation is also relevant. So in Canada, all levels of government influence what adaptation actions are taken, and research suggests that local level adaptation needs support from all levels of government. However, municipalities are well positioned to act on climate change because they have jurisdiction over land use decisions, utilities, waste management, and transportation infrastructure. And so either through adaptation, mitigation, or a combination of both, Canadian municipalities are preparing to adapt to 7 main hazards. These are things like extreme temperatures, flooding, extreme weather, drought, wildfire, and sea level rise. And the District of Sechelt itself faces some of these risks and also risks from coastal flooding and storm surge events. Wildfire risks are really relevant, water shortage, extreme heat, overland flooding, and extreme cold. Also, recent extreme weather events in the District of Sechelt, such as the atmospheric river and the state of emergency that was declared in 2022 for drought, really emphasize the importance of identifying and addressing climate risk, as these events will not only have environmental consequences, but will create intersectional risks to human health, social welfare, physical infrastructure, and the economy. And in conducting this work, I use qualitative methods. So I analyzed the District of Sechelt's bylaws and policies, current academic literature as it pertains to climate change. And I also looked at documents from the Government of BC and the Sunshine Coast Regional District. And then I also conducted semi-structured interviews with District of Sechelt staff to see what was happening on the ground and to see where gaps existed. And then I coded and analyzed this information. So looking at the gaps first, analyzing the broad themes that emerge from both the documented analysis and the discussions, I've identified 6 areas where action can be taken to mitigate and adapt to these climate risks. So these areas include climate change governance, risk management and assessment, natural asset management, infrastructure, planning and development, and then finally public engagement and capacity building. So broadly, I found that the district has the intention to act on climate change and natural hazard risk, but current bylaws and policies lack some specificity and enforceability that's important. Specifically, also public perceptions of climate change risk and importance, outdated municipal policies and regulations, and risk aversion have limited the extent to which action on climate change has been effective. As well, a lack of locally specific data and knowledge, limited financial and technical capacity, and a need for more supportive provincial policies affect many municipalities across British Columbia, and that is also impacting the district itself. But despite the gaps that exist in current bylaws and policies, it's also important to highlight that many opportunities do exist to take action. So first, staff of the district have highlighted that there's a real willingness for the district to try bold and innovative action to reduce the impacts of climate change. And second, the District of Sechelt has already identified climate change as an area of concern and one where further action needs to be taken. This shows that there's a foundation for taking mitigation and adaptation measures and a commitment to do so through programs like participating in the BC Climate Action Charter. And then third, existing tools, policies, and bylaws provide the framework for acting under current legislative schemes. And further key bylaws and policies are currently in the process of being updated or up for revision, including the Subdivision and Development Servicing Bylaw, the DCC bylaw, and the OCP, which really creates an opportunity to mainstream climate change moving forward. And then finally, when speaking to the staff, I learned that the community really cares about nature and the environment. And many of the recommendations in my report are about preserving the natural integrity and landscape of the District of Sechelt in a way that creates resilience and protects people, biodiversity, and infrastructure from future damage. And so in making informed recommendations, I thought it was important to also see what municipalities across Canada were doing to address climate change. And although different municipalities are using different tools, some commonalities emerged that I wanted to quickly highlight. So first, it was common that land use planning tools were the most effective tools in managing climate change risk. And second, many municipalities across Canada are currently in the past few years working to identify climate risks and create climate adaptation and mitigation plans that emphasize the scale and urgency of taking climate action. And then finally, other municipalities have found that the most effective climate change policies and bylaws are integrating climate change into things like the zoning bylaw, the subdivision bylaw, asset management policies, and development permit areas. This information was helpful in creating recommendations as it identified what tools are already working in other municipalities and where action in the district can be focused. So overall, 16 recommendations emerged out of the research and analysis. And for each recommendation in the report, I've outlined current progress on the topic, the effectiveness of the recommendation based on scientific literature, barriers to implementation and costs, and relevant examples of implementation in other case study municipalities. So on the slide, I have just 5 key recommendations I wanted to highlight. These recommendations set the foundation for mainstreaming climate adaptation into decision-making and address some of the risks that lack comprehensive assessment and management. So the first recommendation is to update the official community plan to reflect climate resilience and adaptation in land use planning decision-making, even if we can't see those impacts of climate change yet. The second recommendation I have is to declare a climate emergency, to set out an intention to act on climate change and set out targets for mitigation and adaptation. Third, I recommend that the district undertake an updated hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessment to assess how climate change will impact infrastructure, people, and the environment given future climate projections. And then fourth, I recommend that a natural asset strategy is developed to protect assets such as wetlands, forests, creeks, and coastal beaches with specific goals and targets that are measurable to protect core municipal services. And this is part of the new asset management policy, so developing this as part of that. And then fifth, I recommend creating a new development permit area to address existing and increasing wildfire risk at the urban wildland interface. And then finally, as part of this work, I also developed an implementation matrix that can be used to prioritize the recommendations based on their feasibility and their reported effectiveness. So the prioritization process will be an important step to ensure that staff and council resources and funding are utilized in a way that will have the most benefit for communities. So moving forward, both public engagement and feedback from council would be supportive during the prioritization process. And so in general, to conclude, climate change is relevant across all departments, and the report can be used in the future to find actions that move climate change mitigation and adaptation forward. As part of this report, I've also created a public engagement strategy, which outlines information for developing a survey, a community workshop on climate risks, and just general outreach and education focused on climate change, which can also be used to guide initial engagement processes on these recommendations. So as climate change worsens, the likelihood of extreme weather events happening increases. Given that the impacts of climate change are becoming increasingly observable in the natural and built environment, implementing solutions to create a more sustainable and resilient municipality is imperative. This report sets the stage for future work and capacity building, as the District of Sechelt is well positioned to act through legislative schemes and bold actions if the gaps in bylaws, policies, and public perception are addressed. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you. Is that all?
That is all. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, I don't know where to start. But I'll start with Councillor Shepherd.
Wow, that's a
you.
lot of information blasted out. That's a fantastic presentation. I guess my question is actually to the Director of Planning. Is it an opportune time to fuse these recommendations as we start to look at updating the official plan? Thank you.
Great. Wow. Oh, you.
Enough wows have been said. Okay. Yeah, yes, there's a lot of excellent information there, and I was quite keen. This is the first time I've seen those recommendations today, and quite keen, particularly the wildfire interface development permit area. I think that that's an absolute yes. And the timing is frankly perfect. Thank you.
Oh, and Councillor Rowe is whispering. Can you put the recommendations back up on the? Yes. Have to share it again, I guess. Councillor Bell, while that's coming up.
Well, first of all, tremendous job. I mean, that was a drive-through. How long have you been here, did you say, to do this?
I think this is about week 11.
Oh,
Yeah.
my Lord. That's like accomplishing a year's worth of work. Congratulations. Well done. And very, very good information. And I think, as you say, the same question, it'll start to set the stage for some of the actions that we will have going forward. So well done. Thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I won't repeat what everyone else has said. in your research, do you have any data on, I'm curious how many communities either in BC or across Canada have actually declared a climate emergency?
Yeah, I believe about 150 communities in Canada have declared a climate emergency so far. There's a lot of precedent. A lot of them use a similar format for declaring a climate emergency. When I was going through, there's not a lot of variation in kind of the wording of these. So I've included that in the report as well. Some like common ways that municipalities have gone about declaring a climate emergency. It's normally like setting an intention for a mitigation target for CO2 emissions, and then also just declaring that climate change is happening in the community and there's an intention moving forward in bylaws and policies to take action.
Thank you.
Great. Councillor Inkster.
I mean, so all we need is a flood or a forest fire. And guess what we'll be doing the next month? Declaring a climate emergency. Because that's what's happening on our planet. That's what's happening in Canada. That's why they're doing it. Let's be honest with ourselves. What we've done to our planet is causing climate catastrophe. And that's why that's why emergencies are being declared and these climate events are being declared. And number two is being declared by communities because of flooding and or forest fires. Those are the two main things that we know are happening. So that's why we need to seriously look at it. If we're not prepared to do it because it's a big set of words, then we need to look at sort of DEFCON 1, 2, and 3. Number 3 is that. That's just on that issue. On a number of these other issues that they've been presented here. And I'm glad to see that we've brought in somebody to talk about these things and how they can work with staff to do these, because we got to do a number of these things and we got to start looking seriously at these things. There's 3 simple things we can do though. We can plant more trees, make our community have more alternative transportation and density. And those are things we can do. And so, there's 3 things we can start looking at.
3 being trees. What was the second one?
Alternative transportation
yes,
methods,
thank you.
including more transit.
Right, and
More
density.
bicycles,
All right.
more connectivity,
That's-
more trail networks.
No, that's
More
a
parks.
good.
Yeah,
good
these are
3
things we can do. These are low hanging fruit and look at density. And look, these are low hanging fruit. And then we can look at some of these other things we need to do. And I'm glad we have somebody on staff that has proposed a number of things. And there's other staff members that
on
have
staff for another 3 or 4 weeks, I believe. So
Okay.
intern.
Well,
Okay.
anyway, there's, once they leave, thank you for your work, by the way.
Yeah.
There's somebody at the regional district too that has a lot of information we can draw on too, so.
Very good.
Serious stuff.
Okay, great. Councillor Bell.
Just my opportunity to bring up that in terms of, I'm sure you heard the announcement today that the Sunshine Coast is going to be getting electric buses and charging stations. We're not sure how many yet, but that's great news for us. So I wanted to bring that up today just to celebrate that. And
So,
thanks.
Yeah. great, thank you. Okay, one more from Councillor Rowe.
Just through you to staff, perhaps, Mr. Ellen. Number 3, I'm particularly interested in hazard risk and vulnerability assessment. That sounds like it might be ripe for some sort of grant. In staffs, am I on track with that thinking these days?
Apparently. The other, you got.
It's actually something that we're looking at through the emergency planning process with the CRD.
Very good. Okay, then with thanks for all the work and don't stop. We need 4 more weeks of this. No,
Thank
very much appreciated. Thanks, Hannah. Council, we then go to 5.3, which are the quarterly division progress reports. And let's see, I could really mess up staff by saying, why don't we take them in reverse order, but nobody. No, we'll as presented. So we start on page 78. And I believe Mr. Yates still has his microphone on.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Your Worship. We don't have any formal presentations with these things, but we do have a number of senior staff on hand if council has any questions.
Right. Thank you. Council, questions and clarifications? Oh, I know, hugely important. Page 79, the reference to McHappy Day promotion with a shift work by the mayor. I needed to clarify, Councillor Shepherd was a wizard on the drive-through. We'll let the record show.
Just general.
And just if I might, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Inkster. In that same page, coincidentally, right under the McHappy Day, what is the septic facility engagement? What is that looking like, or timeframes to come back to us? Launched. Who's,
Kern's not
sorry,
here. Kern's not here.
I'm afraid we don't have anybody who can answer that question here with us today,
not
but
I'm way ahead, aren't I?
we'll certainly get back to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, very good, thanks. Councillor Inkster,
Mr. Dillon's not here.
yes,
Yeah.
this is correct.
Yeah, I look at the reports, and the only question I have generally with these reports, almost generally specifically, is just HR. When new positions pop up, new positions, the positions need filling, new designations and or jobs need to be created, and the filling of that's the only questions. I've just seen it mentioned a couple of places, so I just ask about those. Yeah, thanks.
So the question is, how are we doing with recruiting?
Yeah, how we doing with recruiting? Any jobs, any postings needed filling? How did the filling go? Any new
Okay,
jobs
there
created?
is a
Yeah.
chart.
Yeah, but I know.
So did you have a question on that chart?
No, just specifically to how that's going to what you're referencing then. Yeah.
Because I think, albeit I think there's a bit of, would have read better if we reference from jobs posted to applicants hired to employees onboarded. I think most of the positions, this chart shows that you've been successful in filling them. Lots of, I won't say your words, you please,
That's
Ms.
correct.
Roberts.
Through the chair, I would just say that we have had in Q2, we were still seeing a decline in candidates. So we have been able to fill all the positions, but there has been less to choose from. However, that's changing, and we have seen a big difference in Q3. So you'll have a different report on that if I were to speak to it. But as far as the data shows, that we've been able to fill every position. I believe there was 2 positions in Q2 that we had to repost. That's not reflected here, but we have had to repost a couple of jobs, but we have been able to secure most of them. We're still looking for a wastewater sewer treatment operator.
I just always ask because of the, the organizational IQ, I guess, that we are always trying to grow. So thanks for that information. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Shepherd and then Councillor Bell.
If I could ask a question of the Director of Planning on an item under the planning section, something, my apologies, I keep honing in on, which is the Home Havies development. I see the preliminary layout review is extended another 12 months. Is that to allow the developer to finish their what work are they still working on and to present? Thank you.
If I might, we just received new paperwork from the engineering firm working on behalf of Havy. So that was just received a week or so ago. And we need time to go through those new drawings and that new data before we get back to them.
And it's a new engineering firm. I believe.
Yes, it is. Yeah, a new firm has been hired to do
Thank
this
you.
work.
No, thanks.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Bell, please.
Yes, just a question on page 106. Installed new security camera covering Jane Bowers Dog Park and the park's storage area. I'm just wondering if I don't know when they went in, but has there been any impact of putting those in? Do you know?
Thank you for the question.
Happy taxpayer outside.
Regarding the impact, you just mean on the infrastructure or the people that are,
Yeah, I'm just curious if it, has made a difference in terms of some of the things you can see, people are aware of it.
for that area, we have seen a decrease compared to the Q1.
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe that is something that is having an impact. We're not sure if that's probably one of the many, but
Certainly, I would deduce it as having an impact as far as the data goes. I would have to look that up, but
Okay.
yeah, it certainly seems to be.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Yes, please.
Actually, it's just a comment. I just want to say, thank you again to the staff. When you put all of this out, it's absolutely freaking amazing at the amount of work that you're doing. It's so impressive. And, this is something that, even our constituents and our residents in our community, just as to how hard you work. So thank you to the staff for
Very
all
good.
of the work you do.
Great. Thank you for saying thank you. Okay. I'm gonna go this way. I've got to go through all the pages, but let's see, this might be for the corporate officer, actually, albeit it's under divisions, but I'm curious with FOIs. You've given us an indication of how many were received how many, that doesn't signal how many we've responded to. Are we kind of keeping up? Because I know sometimes these things can get a whole surge and we can't deal with them all on a timely basis.
Thank you for the question, Your Worship. Yes, we are certainly caught up. We were a little bit behind on some of our deadlines prior to the second quarter, just with the transition in the department, but we are caught up at this time.
Great, good for you. Thank you. So, anything else, council? Then I guess we will take them as read. Wow. Okay, then that being that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. And seconded, all in favor? We are adjourned. And yes, Pam.